The World Cup winner's curse is officially buried by France, but now Les Bleus have to take on a new role going into the next tournament as the so-called defending runner-up. So let's dive into the history of how previous runner-ups coped with losing the biggest match in all of sports. Los geht's. The loser of a 6-goal thriller in the first ever World Cup final, Argentina was only one of 2 South American teams present in Italy 4 years later due to others boycotting. Even then, they sent out their second team with 5 caps combined and crashed out in the first round to Sweden. The Albiceleste would miss the next 3 World Cups, returning in 1958, ironically in Sweden. Vying to avenge a controversial loss to Italy, the Czechoslovaks sent their best team to France in 1938. They met Brazil in the quarterfinal in what will become known as the first of many battles, the Battle of Bordeaux. In a 1-all draw, 3 players were sent off, which set a tournament record that held until the Battle of Nuremberg, and 4 more left the game injured. Czechoslovakia lost the replay filled with reserves, but more importantly, lost their homeland the next year. Well, in case you didn't know, some minor inconvenience caused Hungary to retain their runner-up spot for 12 years rather than 4. By the time people could focus on football again, Hungary, and indeed the world, were in a much changed place. Now a socialist country, they alongside Czechoslovakia and the Soviets refused to participate in the reborn World Cup. A shame, because this was exactly when the mighty Magyars and their famous unbeaten streak started. We'll get back to them in a bit. I'm sure you know what's coming. Understandably, following one of, if not the most shocking defeat of all time, the Seleção was revolutionized top to bottom. Out with the white shirts and half the men that wore them, in with the national colors that would become iconic one day, but not yet in 1954. Thanks to the lack of tiebreakers, sheer luck sent Brazil to the feet of prime Hungary, and as if the football gods knew this matchup wasn't supposed to happen, 2 teams known for liquid football were swathed into one of the ugliest games of all time. That's right, we got another battle for these silver medalists, the Battle of Bern, that saw a record-tying 3 send-off, 42 free kicks, and 2 penalties, one of which caused a pitch invasion. Brazil lost 4-2, by the way. I can't do this match justice here, but the point is that Brazil not only failed to make up for the Maracanazo, but got hit with even more nightmares. Something has to change, and someone has to step up for O Seleção. I said not yet. The greatness of Hungary's golden team and the pain of the 1954 final are well documented everywhere, so I want to turn a different angle and focus on how it all fell apart so quickly. It was mainly politics. The failed Hungarian Revolution of 1956 shook the team to the core, to the point where players refused to return home after a European Cup tie in Spain, and attackers like Kocic, Cibor, and Puskás stayed permanently. The latter even went on to represent Spain in future World Cups. When 1958 rolled around, Hungary were left with only Hidekuti, Božič, and keeper Krosic. They finished level on points with newbie Wales, but just like Brazil 4 years ago, superior goal difference meant nothing and a replay was needed. The day before the match, Nagy Imre, popular leader of the revolution, was executed after 2 years in prison. Once again shell-shocked, the Magyars lost 2-1. Despite this, they didn't actually fall off until 1972, having reached consecutive World Cup quarterfinals and Euro semi-final, ironically losing against the Soviets. One of the most underrated finalists of all time, Sweden's success in the 1958 home finals is sadly shadowed by the rise of their eternal overlord, Brazil. The joint heaviest loss in the final doesn't take away a legendary run of knocking out the likes of USSR and holders West Germany, putting professionalism's pros on full display in Vikingland. The Blågult cruised through the qualifiers for 1962, but once again, and I can't believe this is for the 3rd time, superior goal difference was ignored in favor of another neutral playoff, in which Sweden lost to Switzerland, who went on to lose every game in Chile. The last dance of the Danubian school and of Slavic people in the World Cup final was sadly yet another loss. In the homecoming 1966 qualifiers, Czechoslovakia was pitted against 3 teams that missed the last 2 finals, including Portugal, who never qualified. Unfortunately, a certain Eusebio decided to turn up, and for the second straight tournament, the runner-up was nowhere to be found. It was peak 60s landscape, Brazil in its own tier and a dogfight below them. Having said that, a challenger was on the rise. You know, the sympathy towards the 1974 Dutch team is well earned, but to turn it into villainizing the West German team that beat them would be very harsh. The reason? Well, the Germans had also waited long enough. Their own golden generation started with a painful loss in a World Cup final, and they avenged England 4 years later, only to lose in what became known as the game of the century. Beckenbauer and Müller, both already in their prime, carried Die Mannschaft through a 4-3 affair for the ages, the former playing a full hour with his shoulder dislocated and the latter netting twice in extra time, which somehow wasn't enough to bring the team back to the final and take on the Golden Brazil. That honor goes to...
Right side, it's Carlos Alberto. Oh, what a great goal that was!
Well, I guess I forgot to mention another golden generation, that was Facchetti's Italy, which successfully redeemed the embarrassment of 1966 by winning the ensuing Euro at home and returning to the biggest match in sports after decades of letdown. Was the final itself a letdown? The jury's still out on that one. What's certain is that the Azzurri once again lived up to its famous stereotype, die young or go all the way, no in between. 4 years later, as one of the oldest squads that showed up in West Germany, it came full circle again, back to group elimination as they couldn't crank up the goal difference against Haiti and lost to dark horse Poland on the last match day, when a draw would have been enough to progress. Thus, Italy became the first runner-up since Hungary to get grouped in the next finals. But it's only gonna get crazier from here. And here we are, arguably the most famous losing finalists of any competition ever. The Total Football Netherlands have long mesmerized coaches, players, columnists, and fans everywhere. So once again, I'm focusing on what happened to them in the coming years. My conclusion? They were actually closer to winning the World Cup in 1978. Hear me out. The Oranje by this point were without Michels, Cruyff and Van Hanegem, yet new boss Ernst Happel, one of the most underrated managers of all time, good at pragmatic adjustments on top of innovation, gave the Dutch new qualities, pure grit. 4 times they came back from the brink of elimination against Scotland, Germany, Italy and host Argentina in the final, the last minute of which saw a moment that would rewrite history forever. No exaggeration, genuinely so much would have changed with these 5 centimeters. But they didn't, so the Netherlands became the first team to lose back-to-back World Cup finals. Oh yeah, how did these runner-ups get on then? What do you mean they became the first team since 1962 to miss the next tournament, and the last one to this day?
You blew it!
On second thought,
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
West Germany followed the Dutch's script of making 2 straight finals and losing both. The first one was just punishment, as the reigning European champions got away with 2 instances that would have blown up Santa's naughty list. The first is the disgrace of Gijón, and the second was the bloody night of Seville that saw German keeper Schumacher got away with this. Anyway, after a disappointing Euro 84, the DFB turned to Beckenbauer to lead the team again, this time from the bench. Die Mannschaft were much more worthy finalists this time, having overcome the host and Le Vengeful Bleu in the midst of all the Mexican heat, humidity and altitude. Down 2-0 to Maradona and company in the final, a deficit from which only the Germans have ever recovered. Guess what happened? But right when they were gonna channel their inner 54 self and complete the comeback. What a classic. I'm sure we'll never see Argentina balling a 2-0 lead but end up winning it ever again. Despite the loss, the Kaiser earned the trust from everyone, hoping to reclaim their European title on home soil in 1988. And they let the Dutch get revenge. Never mind, they revenged them right back 2 years later, followed by Argentina in a one-sided final, making West Germany the first ever team to come back from losing a World Cup final to winning one. Of course, it's the Germans. When they were in desperate need for national pride, the World Cup came to their rescue. Then on the verge of national reunion, the VM once again came to their aid. Fascinating. As for Argentina, whose run was actually quite Mickey Mouse, to be honest, they waved goodbye to the Biraldo Maradona era and began filling the squad with young domestic players, hoping for a smooth transition. And smooth it was. The new generation took home the nation's first Copa America in 32 years, followed by the second in 3 years. Everything was going well, which in Argentina's term can only mean that something was about to go catastrophically wrong.
Señoras y señores, el partido está 4-0 en 30 minutos.
Thankfully, Paraguay also failed to win, meaning that the Albiceleste at least got the cross-continental repechage. This prompted manager Basile to finally mend fences with Don Diego and welcomed him back to the team. Argentina beat Australia to finally secure Maradona's 4th World Cup, which somehow backfired as the captain failed a drug test after matchday 2, completely decimating the morale in La Selección, who lost against Eastern Europeans back-to-back to exit the state and begin decades of agony. Speaking of agony, perhaps no one in the 90s felt it more than Baggio, who suffered back-to-back losses on penalties, having come so close to greatness. Before him, Italy were knocked out by France as defending champs. Put 2 and 2 together and you'll get the Azzurri in 98, a shootout loss against the French. The ponytail almost could have won it in extra time, but he did convert the first pen and pulled off the iconic shush. Unfortunately, it was nullified by Di Biagio, blasting the last pen onto the crossbar, paving way for the 7th and newest winner of the Holy Grail. Not everyone was happy for them though, the loudest being their opponents in the final. A controversial and crushing loss wasn't enough. Brazil was hit with even more bad news in the years followed. Ronaldo suffered a series of potentially career-ending injuries, and Brazil's qualifying campaign for 2002 was shaky at best. Manager Luxemburgo was sacked and replaced by Cup master Scolari with 5 matches to go, and Felipão withheld the huge pressure from dropping Romario, losing captain Emerson right before the campaign, and retaking the crown in spite of everything. And he did so convincingly, as Brazil was one of only traditional powers not to underperform in East Asia, winning every single match powered by Ronaldo's perfect redemption en route to capturing a shining 5th star for O Seleção, becoming the second team to recover from losing a final by winning the next one. And their opponents, the first one to have achieved that. When I started following the World Cup at first, I couldn't wrap my head around the waves of praise regarding the 2006 German team, because in my eyes, they reached the final 4 years ago and couldn't replicate it even with home field advantage. Eventually, I found out that 2002 was one of the most Mickey Mouse final runs of all time during the darkest hour of German football. Long story short, the DFB addressed this by pushing for a complete overhaul of the country's talent pool. Mandatory youth centers, national youth leagues, you name it. Within a few years, and without much expectation, the young core of Lahm, Mertesacker, Schweinsteiger, and Podolski blossomed into a summer's fairy tale that ended only minutes away from another final. This is easily one of the most memorable and unique finalist experience on the list, partly because the two campaigns seemed so disconnected. Instead, the O2 team fell more in line with its runner-up successors. Zinedine Zidane, in his farewell tour as a footballer, took on the spirit of Ballack and Kahn from 4 years prior and pulled off an all-time carry job that started so beautifully but in an instant ended so cruelly. The Starman in 98 could have added a second star that would have cemented himself as a top 10 all-time great and France as a true powerhouse nation. Instead, Le Bleu spent the next 8 years as an absolute disgrace. 2 words, Dominique and Henri. The former for doing a dog water job overall and proposing to his girlfriend on TV minutes after getting dumped out of the groups in Euro 2008. The latter for doing this to set up the winner against Ireland in the qualifying playoffs. Praise be the justice of football gods as the team split into a civil war in South Africa and became the first silver medalist to fail in the groups in 36 years. Ironically, Italy, the last team to do so, repeated that fate as both 06 finalists were nowhere to be found in the knockout stage. As another country that constantly suffered from civil wars, question marks clouded all over the Dutch following identical pathways to their predecessors. However, pushed by greats like Blind and Kluivert, the KNVB made the timely leadership change by bringing back Louis van Gaal. The Oranje was reborn under the pragmatic 3-5-2 with Robben and RVP leading the line, supported by Schneider and a chain of workaholics behind him. And boy, did they get to work. First, a perfect revenge against Spain started and capped off by two of the most memorable goals of the century, then 5 more goals scored in the group stage, followed by 2 legendary knockout duels filled with rescue, controversy, and pure genius. And just like that, the Netherlands were right back where they were 4 years ago. Okay, not quite. Mascherano's bravery and Van Gaal's last-moment cowardness meant that the Dutch fell one step short, failing on penalties for the 5th time and went down a path even worse than France's. At least next time they take it to the spot kicks, it won't be against Argentina again, right? Speaking of which... Today, with all that's happened, we can finally look back on the LB Celeste's 2014 run in a much more positive light. But make no mistake, that silver medal, as well as the 2 following ones, massively overshadowed the sheer distortion and corruption within Argentina's football system. I'll save this for my documentary later, but long story short, an Argentine Game of Thrones led to fund and training struggles to the point where the team needed a messy hat-trick on the final match day to progress to Russia. Sound similar to 1994? Well, the problems this time didn't emerge during the games but long before it. Jorge Sampaoli, a renowned coach who won the Copa America twice beating Argentina, showed none of the competence in either in selection or in tactics. Once again, a brutal draw and defeat meant a do-or-die rubber match, but even after barely scraping through, there was no stopping France, even if the scoreline made it seem close. Many people, me included, felt that AFA butchered Messi's last chance to chase the Holy Grail in his prime, and it just didn't seem like he'll get another shot again. Let's keep that in mind and turn our focus from a team that underperformed to one that overperformed.
What a call to have to make. He's given a penalty.
The first finalist not from South America or Western Europe in 56 years, Croatia were a breath of fresh air the football scene hadn't felt in a long time. But typically, there's a reason why dark horses are called as such. They fall off fast. And with poor showings in the Nations League, a tough but early exit in the Euros, and the age of the squad approaching 2022, all things pointed towards disaster for the Vatreni. And it almost was. A solid draw with Morocco and a great win over an inexperienced Canada could not prevent a series of mishaps against Belgium on matchday 3, where the road surely would have ended if Belgium had anyone else playing up top. Yes, even Higuain. The near death reminded the Croats how to play their best game again, defense and penalties. First against fellow dark horse Japan, and then a huge upset over #1 favorites Brazil, and just like that, Croatia is back to the Final Four. It seems like the football gods felt the need for a dream campaign every 8 years, and that's exactly what they ordered. Unfortunately, the gods were satisfied with halting the story arc there to make way for an even greater, perhaps the greatest arc of all time. Still, it's hard not to tip your hat to everything this tiny country's team had put on display over the years. On the pitch, obviously. In total, the performance of defending runner-ups are surprisingly even, although recent trends suggest that they either crash out as the party began or take it to the last stage. After all, every team has a bit of Italy inside them. Where will France fall on this chart in 2026? Let me know, and until next time.